Well, good morning if you are in Los Angeles, California, Lima, Peru. Good afternoon if you are in Pensacola, Florida, Augusta, Georgia, as they say. Good evening if you're in London or Vienna. And even later if you're in Tel Aviv or Greece or Lebanon. Greetings to listeners all around the world and welcome to Fred Plotkin on Fridays on Adagio, the place where classical music happens. As you know, Adagio is a video and audio streaming platform dedicated to supporting artists and to making classical music and opera available to music lovers all around the world. My guest today is a wonderful musician, a wonderful guy who joins me from his home on the eastern seaboard of the United States. His name is Markham, marvelous pianist, collaborator, teacher, historian, raconteur, Southerner from the southern part of the United States, and he brings that with him too. Mark, welcome. It's great to see you.
Thank you, Fred. Great to see you.
So today is September 13th of 2024. It's Friday the 13th, but I don't care about that. I picked the date in part because 2 days from now, September 15th, would have been the birthday of the soprano Jessye Norman. Now, I guess the first question should be, was she a soprano?
I think so.
Yeah.
I heard things being in that more intimate world sometimes where she would lighten up and just kind of play around with her voice. And I heard high C sharps and D's and E flats pop out with no problem.
Yeah.
Did she enjoy being at that altitude? That's the part, that's where it gets in, because her personality was not one that liked things to be out of control.
Aha. So
she enjoyed being in charge, and she was very well thought out, and everything was well planned. She was a Virgo.
yes,
So
she was.
she had her cards lined up, and she knew what she wanted to do. And I think hanging out up there, because if you listen to those early recordings, there's a Haydn opera. It's pretty much like Constanza in Abduction, and she sings off of that.
Because, I mean, I'm not challenging that assertion because she went by soprano and she would know, but there was a depth in her voice. The notes, the lower notes were quite miraculous in their way too, and she could access them without effort. And therefore, one could say, I mean, there were many other singers who, Marilyn Horne, Grace Bunbury, Shirley Verrett, many more, Dolores Ojek, who covered a huge range.
Right.
Some were called mezzos and some were called sopranos. And, you know, I leave it to the diva in terms of what she decides is her voice. Yeah.
Right. Which dress fits you the best? What do you feel the best in? And I think that's where she was incredibly brave, also unique, and that she believed inside very strongly what she thought worked the best for her and where she felt the most comfortable.
The reason, listeners, that I'm bringing up Jessye Norman is that Mark Markham and Jessye Norman had a very long, deep, productive, beautiful musical collaboration, nearly 300 performances together. You performed all over the world with her. I want, because not everybody knows this, to clarify the terminology you prefer. The older term in the Gerald Moore days was accompanist, who was sort of a servile position. More recently, it's musical collaborator, fellow artist. What term do you prefer and why?
I'm a pianist.
Okay.
But if we want to get into the subcategory, I use this example. If the Queen or King of England were to send an invitation to a friend of mine in London to come for tea, one of those afternoon parties, and I happened to be in town, and they said, Mark, could you accompany me to this event? And I say, of course. And I'd ask certain questions. What is the attire? At what time? Where do I need to be and when? That's it. I would arrive and accompany that person. They were invited. And my job is to walk with them side by side wherever they go. Don't drag behind, don't run ahead to talk to someone else. Stay with that person, understand their needs every second of the way, because they have a relationship to the throne, so to speak, whether they're invited for a certain reason. When you walk on stage with someone who has their career, their following, you accompany them, which is a true art. That you sense things before they ever happen, because of how you listen to someone's voice, how they breathe, how they speak, how they move. And that you know your game so well with what you're doing at the keyboard that you can listen in the entire time and adapt to however you need to adapt. And that to me is a great art. And it does take an incredible instinct. I think people are born with different instincts for doing that, because I know great pianists, and you put a singer in front of them, they have no idea how to get into that world of, you're literally playing inside the sound of a word. And when you say those things, people look at me like, oh, he's lost his mind again. But that is what you do. You touch the keyboard in a way that colors the word the way that person who's speaking it, singing it that night does. They might change it. With Jessye, that was always the great ride, that nothing was ever the same way twice. Even if we did the same song, I was just practicing Widmung, the Liszt transcription. We did Widmung probably 500 times, because she used it as a check piece for sound on every stage we went to. Even at the Montreux Jazz Festival, she's up there singing, some Strauss song or Widmung to check the acoustic, to feel comfortable, because she knew that's how she connected to a space and to her body. So that to me, I mean, call me, first of all, I play the piano. You don't change the title of a violinist when they play in the orchestra. They're still a violinist in that situation. A bassoonist is still a bassoonist, but pianist, for whatever reason, you're going to play song rep. You are accompanying a song that someone else is delivering words, and they're the only people, the only musicians on this planet who get to use words that way. And what a joy it is to try to get inside that sound, whatever they come up with that day.
So let's put aside Jessye Norman for the moment, because she was an artist who I knew, who had very strong opinions and was very well schooled, and nothing came in halves with Jessye Norman.
Right.
But let's take a mere mortal. We don't have to name the name, but let's say an artist with great gifts and insight, but maybe not the global sense that Jessye Norman brought to everything she did. And you sit down with this artist and take out a song that you've worked on, and perhaps she's worked on, or perhaps not. But her voice is different than Jessye Norman. Her interpretation, her use of the German, let's say, her understanding of what the song means to her and how it fits in her body and her perspective and her life experience. You were talking about your touch on the keyboard vis-a-vis the words and the music and the artist. I guess my question is, do you try to guide that person at all, or do you really rely on that person's instincts about how to sing the song?
I think the first time around in any setting, you listen to what that person has to offer, and you find out, is the thread, the thought, is it all the way through? Are they in that story from beginning to end? You can talk about that afterwards, that I got all this, I got that, but then this part here, the story's not clear. And usually when a story is not clear, the instrument goes with that, because the brain has gone someplace else. So people don't sing as well. They're not thinking as well for whatever reason. They get distracted. And I mean, if someone asks me, what do you think? I always offer something. If I have something to offer, but if I've studied my music, I should have something to offer. That's part of my job too. But no, you can't. I don't think, I've never tried to put someone else in someone else's shoes, so to speak.
Yeah.
I can talk about different ways to say things. That's why I think reciting text out loud, as if you're in a room and you have no microphone and you've got to be able to communicate this, because singing is just it's extended speech with pitches and everything. And when you find that, I do that myself so that I understand. Sometimes there is breadth, and for Working with someone like Jessye, you found out what it meant, that she could all of a sudden have this idea that she could encompass the world, and a phrase would last 2 seconds longer than anyone else's. Unfortunately, the piano could start to fade at times because the piano
Yes.
doesn't have a built-in crescendo. But that's just what that's just the joy of the job. And then some people, they aren't prepared. Then you have to tell them, hey, you've got to get this together because you are leading. I'm not going to lead you. You might do that with young people to help them, to give the very young people, high schoolers and undergraduates, to give them an idea of how a story can go. But you get up on the stage, your job, you're facing the public. You're telling the story. You must learn to lead. And that's why I think the biggest challenge for people who sing opera are used to following, because they've got someone waving at them.
Right.
In places where they have to be and hit their mark here and go there and cameras all over the place watching someone on a monitor. They're used to always looking around. So for somebody to actually stand up and lead, that's a huge personality thing to be able to do that.
So you're saying something very important and wonderful in my view, and I've been in this field a long time, but I love getting these sudden realizations. I think you're saying that a singer in opera has to do a lot of following. A singer in recital has to do a lot of leading.
Exactly.
Talk about that more. I love that.
It goes back to what is my job. If you're accompanying someone, they've got to give something to accompany. I'm not going to drag you along and push you like you're walking with someone and you're trying to drag them with you. All that does is bring attention to the fact that the two of you are falling over on each other. If you see people walking that way on the street, you think, oh boy, there's a problem here. But if someone's just walking with someone, I mean, I have friends who are in their 90s, some are over 100. We walk together. I walk at their tempo. I don't walk 3 steps ahead and turn around and look at them. You have a wonderful mother. You make your whatever you want to call it. You say you're going to accompany someone, you accompany that person at their tempo, in their speed. What makes
I don't get too political here, but I'll mention one thing that the world saw. When Donald Trump was walking with Queen Elizabeth at Windsor, and he walked ahead of her.
No, but exactly, that's the thing to understand. Every moment has its thing. And either you understand that innately, or because you've been told and you took it in and you made it your own, or you just had to learn it for those 30 seconds and then you threw it out. But that's just part of being here. You show up at a dinner. I remember one of the first dinners we went to after a recital in Brussels, and there were maybe 16 of us at this long table, and there was silver in every direction, left to right, 5 glasses in front of us. And the first thing that shows up, and we all been told that Jessye chose the menu, and out comes this fluted glass, a big coupe filled with fruit. And everyone's looking around like, okay, will we wait for Madam to start? And then what do we eat this with? It was, I was at the other end of a table and around some friends who I had known for years. And we all started laughing and giggling, like, where do we go? And we're all from different parts of the world. Which one is it? Spoon, and some people are eating the fruit with a spoon. I mean, just those types of things, but you remember it forever that you pierce the fruit with the fork and you drink the syrup with the spoon. And we laugh about it to this day and said, this is how it works. Understand.
And also pay attention.
I mean, exactly. Your radar is up. I tell people I have 1, 2, 3, or 4 antennae going constantly when I'm on a stage. And if it's just the two with one other person, that's one thing. But with Jessye, when she decided she wanted to do more jazzy type stuff and we had a band, I was the liaison between her and the band. Everybody else was pure jazz. That's what they did. That was their job. And I was the go-between that had to figure out all this and how to speak and how to communicate and styles and playing things and learning from them and trying to explain to them, this is how she feels this, and to get them to fit it.
So I want to go very technical here. I'm not a pianist. I studied clarinet, but I grew up around pianists, and my father was a piano tuner, so I was around pianos a lot. And I remember that he would show me the parts of the piano and how he would work with them and how each artist that he worked with had different specifications about what they wanted for their piano, whether they were the pianist or whether they were a singer.
Right.
And if you are performing with a, let's say, a mortal artist, not Jessye Norman, um, who with whom you're collaborating more and perhaps accompanying, perhaps leading, um, things like the pedals. Would you talk about what the pedals are, what they do, and when you would use them in a vocal recital?
The pedals on the piano, number one, are played with your ears. Because when you touch the pedal with your foot, it frees the string to where the
Mhm.
string can then vibrate, that note can vibrate and travel out into the room. It's not an off-on switch, which a lot of pianists play it that way. It's either fully depressed or fully dry. There's a whole world of sound in between this little zone of an inch, maybe how it goes up and down. And it is up to your ears to decide, okay, do we need more sauce on the plate? Do we need something dry in order to balance it out? And you listen to everything else that's going on, and you're doing the salade composée, if you will, right then and there, of understanding what's going to make this plate look more beautiful so that it can be enjoyed. And the same thing, we serve with sound. We change rooms with sound. What we offer, you put art on the wall, that changes a room. You put lights in a room, that changes it. We are in charge of sound. And what sounds we put into a room change the way people feel. But it's up to us to understand it first and to feel that and to get it through you so that it's not a surprise when you all of a sudden decide to do it.
Mhm.
But working with singers, you want to always hear that text. Those words are the most important. It's why we're all there. That's why the piece was written, and the harmony, and to make sure all that's clear. And so your foot is working because of your ears, your foot is working constantly, trying to make sure that what appears in that room is crystal clear for the right reasons.
Mhm.
Does that answer the question?
Yes, it does very beautifully. The piano lid and that peg, I don't know what is it called, a peg, a holder,
Right, yeah, that thing. Mhm.
that thing. Um, what is the philosophy and the psychology behind the lid and how is it used?
If a singer doesn't sing with a blanket over their head, then I should be able to lift the lid and put the piano on full stick, because I should be able to play just as quietly as I would in a Debussy prelude
Mhm.
that I would in Der Tod und das Mädchen of Schubert.
Yeah.
Well, that is not, you put the lid down, the lid then gets closer to the bass strings, and we get this going on because the sound isn't free in the room. So it's muddy, it gets murky. And a singer with trying to sing through that, they're singing literally through it, and the sound of the piano doesn't travel. And I know all sorts of, everybody has their ideas. And I said, well, could you please listen with your ears and not your eyes?
Mhm.
It happened a couple of times with Jessye. We'd do our dress rehearsal on the stage and everything would be fine. And we'd go to our dressing room and come back an hour later and standing in the wings. Are you ready? Yes, we are. I look on the stage and someone's put the lid on short stick. And I wait, hold on. I'm not going to fix that when I walk on the stage. Come on,
Right.
guys. Somebody please go out and put this in and put it in the correct peg in the hole. Don't put it in the last hole. That's for the little stick, because you put it in that other one, it's not stable. Just what I need is for that to come crashing down while she's singing the Erlkönig or something. It could be very effective, but
Which
we
would be
really
the perfect one?
right. That'd be
Oh,
the perfect.
Pater, oh, Pater. Boom.
Down we go.
Um, did you ever work with Grace Bunbury?
No, I met Grace. It was a night in Salzburg after Jessye and I had done with the band this huge jazz evening as part of the summer festival. And I was not told this before I walked onto the stage. They had sold 250 seats on the stage of the
Oh,
Grossfestspielhaus. And Grace happened to be in the public that night. And I come out of the dressing room, we're all going to this dinner, and I'm walking through, and there's Grace standing there waiting for me. And she calls me over, takes my arm, and she tells me, pays me very nice compliments and says, we really need to do something like this. I can do this. And that was it. We probably chatted a little bit more that night, but I never heard another word. And now she's no longer with us. But she felt inspired because, it's a very odd job to be able to go from playing Schubert and Ravel to then turn around and be able to do this other stuff. But it's something that I've done since I was a child and never thought of. No one ever said that's hard or you can't.
Right.
And so
The
for
reason
me,
I
it
asked
was,
about Grace, is who I worked with, even more than I worked with Jessye, is that she was no shrinking violet, and she was quite dramatic and could be funny and irreverent and so on. And there was a season where she was touring a recital program, and she would sweep out onto the stage and looking beautiful and so on, and bow to the audience, and then turn to acknowledge the presence of the pianist. And then her hands would go up in mock horror as she saw that the lid was on the short stick. And she would lift it up, she would put it in the proper place, she'd turn to the audience, and then she'd go off the stage and come back out and take a second whole bow.
that's
And then,
that's wonderful.
then she said to the pianist, "And now we can begin."
It does sound like Grace.
um, you raised something that was I didn't think to ask you, but it's a wonderful question. Um, the first time I ever went to a concert that had members of the audience on the stage was Alicia de la Rocha and Victoria de Los Angeles. When I was a little boy, I was about 8 or 9, and my dad took me, and it was at Carnegie Hall, and I was not on the stage, thank goodness, but I was baffled by seeing that. As a musician, how does that change your performance, if at all? Number one, acoustically, the fact that there are more bodies there absorbing sound and giving off heat, but also just the awareness that they're right over your shoulder, you're behind you, and you from the keyboard could see a lot of them reacting.
Right.
Talk about that.
Well, this is the most recent example of this, and it was a very somber occasion, but it was for the memorial service for Jessye at the Metropolitan Opera.
Yeah.
And I was playing Morgan of Strauss with Lisa Davidson, and then the Wotan's Farewell with Eric Owens. And we did our dress rehearsal. It was very quick done. And then it was time for the show. And, being an opera house and you're on a big stage, you have someone there in the wings, they literally hold your arm and then tell you to go, and you go. There's no great preparation, as if it's a, recital situation. And I walked onto the stage, and we got to the piano and we bowed, and I turned around to sit myself down, and the entire choir was on the stage. No one had told me that there would be, what were there, 80 people on the stage? Right. There were a lot of people in that choir, and people who were very emotional and very connected in a certain way with Jessye, what she meant to them. And I sat down and you could feel it. I mean, it was overwhelming at first, and plus to start out with a piece like that in this situation and everything about it. And I thought, you know what? You are here to play this song. That is the only reason why you were here, and you're going to have to figure it out very quickly. And this is what experience is, that you do things and you figure out, I've got to do my job. This is what I said I would do. But I remember feeling this and could feel the breathing. I could hear the breathing of people. I heard a couple of sobs. I heard at the end, people holding their breath. And you know what? I just back to what I said. You are not there to acknowledge that. You're there to do your job, which is, you said you would play this song. And that means you play it the best you ever could. And I did the best I could in that day. It was, I would never start a program with that piece. No singer would, in their right mind, come out and say, just start with that. And the piano, it's really a piano piece with the poor singer singing obligato over I played the piece twice. And the singer sings the second time, and they sing another little counter melody correctly against the tune. So that was, those jazz concerts, it was a little bit looser, though at the same time, my antennae were up on Jessye, constantly watching to see she might come up with some new idea to do something or want to leave the stage, or who knows? You hope these people behave. I was trained very young, it was in my 20s, playing house concerts. as a solo pianist, a lot. I remember sitting in one living room and everyone was very relaxed and they loved music and everything. But the man sitting literally to my left, he started swinging his leg, rocking, just crossed his legs and swinging the leg. I mean, a good 2 feet going left to right there by me. And I reached down in between something and grabbed his ankle gently and just held on to it, didn't look at him, just held his ankle like, you will stop this now, right? And it stopped and he never moved again, the poor man. He was mortified at the end of it all. I'd try not to embarrass him, but things like that, what are you going to do? You have to, if you can stop it, then lucky you. The National Gallery and the West Garden Court, you sit with the public there behind you
Yes.
and out.
Yeah.
Very careful who they choose to allow to sit in front of a pianist.
Yeah.
And I had a problem when I played my last solo recital there. Someone on the front row just fiddling around and looking through things the entire time. And I said, you know what, we have enough seats out here. Could we please move that person? And they did. And, but you're there to do your job. You got to figure out how to do.
A number of years ago, I don't remember who the performer was, but I remember the incident. It was at what used to be called Avery Fisher Hall, now David Geffen Hall at Lincoln Center. But when it was Avery Fisher Hall, the configuration of the stage was different than now. It's better now. But before it was more traditional. And someone was seated on the stage and she felt ill while the performer was performing. And she didn't know which way to go to try to get off the stage. And she was on house right, stage audience left. She walked behind the piano to try to get to the steps on house right, stage left. And there were 3 or 4 steps down. She fell and she fainted. And ushers went to her, and I was an audience member that day. And, it was very scary. And I always, as someone who has been a house manager of theaters of the Metropolitan Opera House, you think in those terms about audience safety and not disturbing the performers. Were it up to me, I would never put an audience member on the stage.
Well, they do it very well in Japan.
Yeah, I'm sure. But if someone
It's
doesn't
not
feel
really-
well,
Right,
this woman tried not to be
right.
intrusive, but she really didn't feel well. And she fell, and I don't know what became of her. I think she survived, but it was probably, who knows what. Yeah. But it's it's live performances. Have you ever performed in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam?
Many times.
Yeah. So it's one of my favorite theaters as an audience member. But describe where the stage is and where the audience is and where the rest of the audience is. And
how you get to the stage.
How to get to the stage, you're right.
How you get to the stage.
I've stood on that stage when a friend of mine was rehearsing, but I've never spoken from the stage. I've never worked with a full audience from the stage. But it's one of my favorite theaters, but I can imagine that for a performer, it could be a nightmare.
Well, the entrance, I bring that up. You have the stage, you have the public in front of you, but then there's a whole world. Like the theater goes up and back behind the stage, and you make your entrance from behind that public, and you walk down a flight of steps to the stage.
Very steep.
With no handrail.
I know that.
People on either side. And the first night, I got there and they opened the doors, and I looked down the steps and thought, you stay well back from Madam. That dress is long in the back. Let her have 10 steps ahead of you. You'll get to the stage eventually. But she didn't want me walking beside her. She did the entrance. She walked by herself at that point. But I remember thinking, this is not possible for everybody. And I know they make concessions for certain people, but you never have to go back up. You walk off the side and they have a little dressing area over there, which is really quite small. But there was one night in Amsterdam where we finished the first group of songs. We get backstage in our little holding pen, and there's a television camera there showing us the stage. And I'm sitting there having a sip of water or whatever. And I look up and I see this woman rifling through my scores on the stage. She has wandered up from her seat and she's turning pages, looking at is this nonsense he's playing? And I thought, what is she doing? And everyone turned, worried, what's happening here? And it's just someone who was not well and decided that they just wanted to look at my music. But
Wow.
you know, this is these are the risk. It wasn't, wouldn't consider a big risk. It was just things that can happen. Anything live,
Yeah.
anything can happen. Anything.
Vicissitudes.
Right. It's just
Yeah.
part of you're gonna go public, look out.
Yeah.
It's just part of go. If you have a public life, pay attention.
Yeah.
You are public
When,
property, certainly.
where, and how did you and Jessye Norman meet?
The very first time I heard her was at the Kennedy Center in the spring of 1982. A very dear friend of mine called and said that she had bought 2 seats to Jessye Norman's recital on a Sunday afternoon, and they were on the very last row in the corner, which they were, and I had a car. She didn't have a car, so we were in school here at Peabody, and so we ran down to DC in my car, sat up there in the very last row, and so I heard her then and thought, wow. And I think Jeffrey Parsons was playing. And I just turned to my friend afterwards and I said, you know, I think I could do that job. I was all 20 years old, 21 or something at that point. And that I would go to Tanglewood every summer. I heard her sing there. I was sitting on the very front row and she came out and sang the Mahler Third Symphony or something. You know, got to see all that. I met her briefly at a recital in Pittsburgh afterwards. That was it. And then a couple years later, I get a phone call from my teacher, then her manager, and are you available these dates? Yes, I am. Okay, you're engaged. Great. Miss Norman would like to call you tonight. She'll call you at 8:30. And I said, oh, okay. I remember sitting on the floor. I convinced myself, just sit on the floor. That way, in case you do fall out, you won't make that much noise. And I sat on the floor waiting for the phone, and exactly 8:30, that phone rang, and I answered the phone. Is this Mark? And I said, yes, it is. She goes, this is Jessye Norman. I said, yes, I know. She loved telling everybody her name. It was always, that was a funny thing. She
Yeah, I know.
sing a concert, then meet someone right afterwards. So, hello, I'm Jessye Norman. And we'd all burst out laughing, like, yeah, we know. We just watched you for 2 hours sing a program. So we spoke on the phone. And then 6 weeks later, I met her at her flat in London. And we rehearsed. For that, she had never heard me play a note. She had never met me for any length of time that would to anything memorable. And that's how it started. And I just showed up at her house and she said, well, it looks like we have some work to do. And I said, yes, we do. She goes, well, let's get busy. And we did.
I'm going to ask a question about her, not the obvious question that everyone asks. I don't go there. But where I'm going to go is something that you've just opened the door crack to. Namely, I knew her for a long time, and I knew her mostly in New York City, where she lived up the river from here, and we worked together at the Met, and we did different things. And one of the many things I loved about her was that her social values and her politics very much aligned with mine.
Mm-hmm.
Except that she sold Girl Scout cookies and I didn't. But apart from that, we really were like-minded in many ways and had a lot of things to talk about. And she was hugely informed and intellectual and sophisticated in her opinions and not reflexive. And she was very well schooled, and her opinions were backed up with facts.
Right.
But when I was with her in New York City, she was speaking mostly to sort of mid-Atlantic, the slightly Georgian accent. But when you just now had her in New York and then in London, your accent was a little different with each one. And Miss Norman famously, because I once did something I'll talk about later with you, with her in Oxford, England. And her accent was entirely different from the woman that I had known in New York. I've heard her in France. I've heard her in Salzburg speaking, and her accent, her English language in Salzburg was inflected with a lot of German sound. And her consonants were harder auf Deutsch than they might have been in French. And there was a certain rolling vowel in her British English that was not the same as the long, soft vowels of her American English. Many people remarked on this all the time. Some people found it phony. I didn't find it phony, but her ear obviously was very attuned to the place that she was in. And without posing a question, my question would be, what was your experience in regarding all of this, and what did you make of it, if anything?
Well, we both were Southerners, and she was a Black woman. Black women already know they have enough against them already, and they really can't hide that. Okay, as a guy from the South, one of my first jobs outside of Florida was in Lenox, Massachusetts, with all these New Yorkers who came to a certain resort. Everyone wanted hot, hot coffee. I had never heard coffee in my life. And I thought,
You got a problem with that?
if I walk to the table and say, "You want some coffee?" It's not going exactly. But if I say it the way I grew up saying it, they're going to may possibly judge me. What am I going to do to hide that so that doesn't become a conversation? Because I didn't think at that point when I was 19, 20 years old, that should be an issue. I would hear with all these sophisticated New Yorkers, and I had to find my accent, the way to say things so no one would talk about that. They'd focus on me as the musician and blah, blah, blah. So I remember modifying all that, and it kind of turned into a game. And when you're in music, especially if you're in vocal music, you learn lots of languages. Whether you're fluent in all of them, I'm only fluent in 2, in French and in English, but my Italian's not bad, my German's not bad, Spanish, fine. You start picking up all these different things. And when you're working with people who come from other countries besides your own, I can't speak English the way I would speak it with my Southern homies. You know, if I started in there, if I went down that path, they'd all sit there stunned, wondering, what is wrong? What happened? I'm in France. People want to know, why don't you speak French with your Southern American accent? Because I don't have an accent in French. I do it with a Southern accent in French. And then they all burst out laughing, think it's the funniest thing they've ever heard. I said, yeah, that's why I don't do it. Why am I going to take your ear that way? With Jessye, I mean, I heard everything. I heard the Deep South, the two of us together, it could be dangerous sometimes, to get us a little loose, and afterwards, and just the two of us, and it would cut loose and go exactly where it was. There was nothing added. It was just what it was. But then the woman could speak German better than Germans.
Yes.
She could be interviewed on German television. Her French was wonderful, but once she realized that I spoke French, she would throw me under the bus in front of things, like the night in some place in the south of France where the photographers were at the foot of the stage for an outdoor concert, click, click, zack, zack, click, click, going on during the first song. And she turns to me and just says, "They need to leave now, or there won't be any more music. Could you please go and tell them this?" And here I am going to the foot of the stage, kneeling down and having this conversation in Provence with these guys. And I had lived down there for 12 years. So I knew how to deal with it. But she decided she was going to abdicate speaking French at that point, even though she could. But the accent, there was a night we did something for the United Nations, and Robert De Niro was next to her, and the former Prime Minister of Australia and his daughter were next to me, and she's talking on and going on, and all of a sudden De Niro puts down his fork and knife, really kind of he was flustered, and looks at her and says, "Where are you from?" And she said, "Augusta, Georgia."
Augusta, I know.
Augusta. She's the only person that ever says that. It's Augusta. Augusta, Georgia. And he goes, "Well, why do you have a British accent?" "I've been to the British Isles on numerous occasions." And that was the response. I was falling into my food, laughing, thinking, are you really going to keep pursuing this? Come on. You can't, because she'll take you down the road.
Yeah. But
Ride the
serious
ride with her,
question,
and
why did she do this? It led to so much speculation. I always felt, her English, her German, her French were beautiful, and do it in your own voice and your own speech. And she knew how to create the proper vowels and consonants in German. Her German consonants were somewhat over forced, I sometimes felt, but it was better that than under. And
I've always tried to catch the mood. I think it was sometimes if anyone heard that, I mean, I have a feeling sometimes, but now I really don't care anymore. My brother loves to say that about me. He said, "You really don't give a damn, do you?" I said, "Why am I going to worry about what other people think about me? I have to deal with that. That's my responsibility, you know." But if people judge you based on, here we go, perfect story. Santa Fe, 10 years ago, I'm there. They're doing La Donna del Lago. Mariana Pizzolato is singing. She was brought in. She's taking over. She's singing. Joyce is there. Larry's there. All these people are there. And they wanted to play poker one night. They had a poker table. $20. Fine. So I go to play. And I'm sitting there and I'm just me. I don't know. Paul Appleby's sitting next to me. Paul, if you're watching, forgive me. Paul is next to me. And I'm losing a little bit for a while, but I'm just myself. And the next thing I'm winning. And I'm pulling all these chips in front of me. And I'm using my regular Southern accent, whatever, talking away. And Paul out of nowhere just stops when I'm pulling all these chips in towards me and says, "Oh, you in that Southern accent of yours trying to make everyone think you're stupid." Exactly what's going on. What's a jack of hearts? I asked some question, which is the flush come before the straight or something like that. And he said, "Oh, yeah, but that Southern accent of yours trying to act like you're dumb. You don't know how to play this game. I've got your number now." I'm like, "Sweetheart, please." That's the thing. I mean, when you work, you're working outside of your zone, so to speak, your comfort zone where you really feel you can just be yourself. Then I can neutralize it, because that's what you have to do when you're coaching. Vowels have to be neutralized unless you're doing something with a dialect. And if you don't hear it purely, then you don't understand where it's coming from. People tack, I'm gonna tack to you. I'm like, no, that's not the vowel.
Right.
You have to figure this out. And you're singing something in English, not American English, but you're singing Handel in English. You must understand the pronunciation because it does color the sound and offers a different atmosphere to that text. And with Jessye, who knows where she came up with stuff? Because I heard everything under the sun, and sometimes it would come out, and we'd be in the middle of London at a dinner party somewhere, in a restaurant, and she'd be carrying on like a crazy Southerner. And then someone would piss her off, and next thing you know, all of a sudden the English would come back and be very uptight, and scare people to death. And I thought, you know what? If she's entertaining herself, what's it to me? So,
Did you read her memoir?
yes, I did.
So did I. It did not get great reviews. I loved it. And there's, among the many things that were in the book, was the following: at a certain point, that she obviously was a Black woman. She was from Augusta, Georgia, from a middle-class family. She talks at considerable length about what it was like not to be in a Black family, but as a girl in a family born in 1945. And one of the takeaways that I got from the book that was very strong was the fact that growing up in a middle-class, educated African American community where most of the people were Black and there were white people around, it was not, she didn't experience herself as Black, but she experienced herself as female. And what a girl born in 1945, the expectations of her as opposed to the boys in the family, and she said this to me numerous times, that she often felt more oppressed or challenged as a woman than as a person of color, as a Black person. Was that your experience? What did you feel about that with her?
Well, we had many conversations about all sorts all sorts of topics. This one I could address by how I watched how she dealt with men sometimes. When a man in a theater or wherever it might be would not, would there be an undertone of superiority, or oh, you're just a woman, or you're a diva, you're the whatever. She bucked up and then went into power mode.
Yeah.
Survival, not survival mode, because the woman was strong. There's no doubt about that. But that she was aware of that. I think growing up in Augusta, the African American culture and the white culture were separate. You know, so she did, that was okay. You grow up, that's how you grow up. Then you don't know what all this other nonsense is, because that's what it was just nonsense. So it wasn't made part of who you were as a human being. But this man-woman thing, you know, to think that at that point women had only had the right to vote when she was born for 25 years.
Yep.
It's kind of hard to even imagine nowadays that we've come that, oh boy, it's not too long
Black
ago.
women faced greater challenge, Black people in general, but especially Black women. Last month was August of 2024. So 60 years after Fannie Lou Hamer made her famous speech at the Democratic Convention, Is This America?, about the fact that Black women then were basically barred from voting in much of the South, in Mississippi in her case. And I always got that about her, but I think that there were other leading Black artists, Leontyne Price, many others, who were defined by the public, if not by themselves, as Black artists.
Right.
Well, Jessye Norman obviously was Black, but I think that she deeply felt herself as a woman who
Right. She
happened
was
to be Black.
recognized for a human being,
Right.
woman who did her job extremely well, who worked
Yeah.
so hard to do it the very, very best. That was what was instilled in her family. That's very, very clear where all that comes from.
Yeah.
But Jessye grew up in Augusta. Leontyne comes from Laurel, Mississippi. Laurel, Mississippi was not created until the 1880s.
Yeah.
This was a town from people from Chicago came down to do timber.
Mhm.
So it wasn't a city steeped in this horrible tradition of the South, so to speak. It still was in Mississippi, but it was not the same thing. But I'm sure Leontyne grew up in the same very segregated.
Yeah.
The African-American community had their community, and they nurtured each other and looked after their own, even while they had to go and were subservient to the white culture of the town.
Yeah.
And this is where, I mean, everybody's going to take things. I talk about this all the time. I said certain notes in the voice or certain notes on the piano. There are certain notes, you can bump them. They don't budge. They stay there for you. Then there are other notes, you just barely look at it the wrong way, and that note goes sideways. We all have different personalities. We're all made different. We all have different experiences, and how that manifests when it's put in front of other people, and how far back that woman could hold things, because she didn't forget. She certainly held on to things she wanted to hold on to. And with men, it was very clear sometimes, you could tell. And I thought, what happened? Because I wouldn't be around all the time to know what had happened, who had said what, was anything even said. And so when I started working, I tried to, what do you call it? Cut them off at the pass before it ever got to her, to make sure that we didn't have to have that part of the evening. Yeah. And that's another aspect of doing this job.
Right. What I'm about to say, I know you understand very well. The stereotype of all opera singers, not of male, female, any color, is that they're not terribly bright. And my experience is the complete opposite, that they're among the smartest people I've ever met. A couple of exceptions, but basically, as a group, they're incredibly smart because they retain languages, they learn music. When they're doing opera, the acting, the productions, the costumes, the history, the culture, the language, everything that they retain. They have to be spontaneous and in the moment.
Exactly.
They are remarkable in all kinds of ways. And so therefore, I never had that perception of opera singers. I've worked with almost all the great ones. But within that context, I will say that two opera singers, Jessye Norman, and I won't name the other, were far and away the most intellectual people I've ever known among opera singers. And they bring with that, in my view, something of a burden. Because when the intellect is so powerful, so supremely analytical, that they can take everything apart like you're dismantling a gorgeous machine or a clock or something and put it back together again and understand it better having put it back together again. She was that way about music. She was that way about politics. Anything I engaged with her on, she was that way, as
Right.
is this other person. And they're wonderful for that. But I've often felt that these two people, Jessye and the other, who are supreme artists, both Americans, um, sometimes were not the most spontaneous because the preparation was so great and so thorough and the vocal gifts so complete that everything, and I hope wherever Jessye is, she's not going to send thunder down, felt beautifully conceived and executed, but not always spontaneous.
Hmm.
Whether recital or opera, and you properly made the distinction before about leading and following, which I love that. I'll take it with me always. Thank you. I'll attribute you. Um, that sometimes Jessye Norman in an opera setting, which is where I worked with her, often if it was not going the direction that she would have liked, everybody around her sort of had to adapt. And in a concert setting, the glories that she produced with you and with others who worked with her were fantastic. But what I'm about to say, I don't recall if you were the pianist that night. One of the greatest things I ever heard her do was at a concert at, I think, Carnegie Hall, not Avery Fisher. Um, After a beautiful program of the big works that she would do, Leonard Bernstein had recently died. And she, as a tribute, sang his song Lonely Town.
Mhm.
And clearly, she didn't have the time to do the full Jessye Norman on that song. So she sang it with a freedom, with a emotional connection, with a sincerity, with an openness that made it absolutely ravishing because it did not receive the thorough analysis and study and thought that the others had. Were you playing that night?
I wasn't playing, but I was there.
Okay. Am I completely off the mark in what I've just said? And I'm not putting you on the spot, but talk about her and spontaneity.
No, I mean, the woman, like I said from the very beginning, controlling, being in charge, being in control, that was paramount. And to prepare a program, the preparation that she went through, even when, I mean, I met her, we started working when she was 49 years old. She had already had a 25-year career at the very top of the profession. She was still preparing programs thoroughly. Everything was always memorized, whether except it was some new world premiere of something, but everything was prepared to the nth degree so that one can be, for me, so that one can be spontaneous on this stage, that you know that you're tethered, you can jump, but you're not going to splat at the bottom, you're going to be caught and be able to fly. um she she sang a recital one night in Brussels. Probably it was a quarter tone to half step flat the entire night, consistently from beginning to end. It was consistent. Something was on her mind. Don't know what it was. I didn't really know her. This was like our fifth concert together. And I'm sitting there listening, thinking, all right, how do I voice this? Can I send a message? And I did what all I knew to do, and nothing changed. I just thought, okay, get over it. You'll be fine. And a friend of hers afterwards wanted to say, were you transposing? An English friend. And I said, no. She said, maybe you should have been. And I thought, oh, wow. Okay. And so
Meow.
we got past that. And 3 nights later, we're in Luxembourg. And something had set her off before the concert. And she's vocalizing, singing Costa Diva in her dressing room, which I only heard once in 20 years. It was extraordinary.
I can imagine.
And then went on to the stage and stood there and sang. At first, I thought it was detached because I had no experience. I had 5 concerts under my belt at that point. And she started singing, and it was effortless. It was completely on the breath. It was very simple, as if she was singing to one person sitting there in a chair in front of her. And it startled me initially, and I thought, wow, is she just kind of throwing this away tonight? I didn't know. Maybe something was really upset her. But it continued that way through the entire evening with this effortless, very elegant, like you said, didn't have enough time to prepare it, though she had, because we'd already done the program twice. And I heard these things come out, and every note was spot on, perfectly in tune from beginning to end, high to low, 5 or 6 encores, no fatigue, no nothing. And I thought, what just happened? How could something change so much between 4 days of a performance? And her brother, her youngest brother, George, passed away, I think it was 2010, around there, 2009. And our next performance was in Leipzig about 6 weeks later. And I didn't know if she was going to sing. I don't know if she was going to postpone the tour. And she said, well, we're doing it. So I came from France and went to her house in London, and we rehearsed, and there were a lot of tears and lots of, just talking, because we had done a lot of the music, but we rehearsed everything. She sang everything. And on the stage that night, I mean, she sang well, but I was worried the whole way through. I was really paying attention to find out, where is she? The person, who is the person in this story, trying to tell this. And we get to the encore. She wanted to sing Solitude of Duke Ellington.
Yeah.
And I thought, fine. So I played my introduction, and she sang. We went through the song, and then the song, we go back to repeat the song, and she just kind of improvises and hums or does different things. And I get to that place, and I'm waiting to hear, I started the song over and waiting to hear her sing, and I didn't hear anybody singing. But I heard her saying the words, but as if it were someone, a foot away from you, and just talking. And she had turned in my direction. So she put her side profile to the public and just stood there with her head down, saying, in my solitude, you haunt me. And I get chills now thinking about it.
Yeah.
And I'm just playing underneath all of this, listening to her. And she was speaking to her brother on the stage in front of these people, a German public.
Yeah.
And then somewhere in the middle of the song, she comes by, I sit in my chair, and then started singing again. And we got to the end.
Wait, the lyric, I sit in my chair, or you were sitting in your chair?
No, the lyric, sitting in the chair. I was on the bench, but I sit in my chair filled with despair. Nobody can feel so bad.
Yeah, I know.
Bloom, all that stuff. And she finished the song, and you could tell when it was over, the public didn't know what to do.
Yeah.
They had just witnessed the complete stripping down, if you will, of all of the learned things that we all go through, especially when we spend our lives working on music that's not from our roots.
Right.
American, you're learning German music, Austrian music, French music, Italian music, all these things. You incorporate them. You hope you can deliver them with a naturalness and with your real soul connected to it all. And that's just a lifetime's journey. But in that moment, we all witnessed this person, this human being who was suffering profoundly.
Yeah.
And there was a young couple who came backstage afterwards, violinist and pianist. They were going to come work with me in France. So they were there to meet me for the very first time. And they took me aside and said, is it always like this? This was unreal. I've never experienced anything like this in any time. And it was true. But that took away all, and to be able to see that, to hear that, to feel it, to hear her sing at her Christmas parties when we sang the 12 Days of Christmas, and she would
Yeah.
lock the house, we'd all be upstairs and everyone would have to sing their Christmas carols. And when we got to 5 gold rings, she would sing, that would be her line. I've never heard anyone sing 5 gold rings as beautifully as she did. And it would be more gorgeous every time she was singing. She was like a little kid, so excited about Christmas.
Yeah.
So it was, I mean, the complexity of the lady was,
Yeah.
it was real. It was real.
Oh, yes. Another time that I experienced her spontaneity in a wonderful way. I don't remember the dates, but it was either late March or early April of 2014. And that year was the 150th anniversary of the birth of Richard Strauss.
Mhm.
And he was born in June. And we were both in Oxford, England, because I had on several occasions been a speaker presenter at the Oxford Literary Festival. And that was the year, I guess, that her memoir came out. And she was a speaker. And I didn't hear her talk. She didn't hear mine because we were speaking close to
Right.
one another, not quite the same time, but close enough that we couldn't hear each other's talk. But there was a dinner after, and we were seated together. And we're surrounded by a lot of young students, music students at Oxford, in the different colleges. And one of them said to both of us, "Would you consider teaching us about Richard Strauss?" Strauss, as Jessye said. And I nodded, and she looked at me with a long look, and she said, "I suppose." And so we booked a room for about 11 that night after the dinner. And Jessye nor I had the chance to talk or prepare. And I said to her, I used an Aretha Franklin word, we're going to do a throwdown. We're basically going to, we're just going to be spontaneous here. At 11 at night, we called it Strauss After Dark. And these students came, and there was not even a piano. But she and I just sat, not on a stage, but sort of in the front of a classroom surrounded by students. And until about 3 in the morning, we were talking about Richard Strauss. I wasn't interviewing her. She definitely was not interviewing me. But I would occasionally ask her questions. The students would ask us questions. She asked them many questions, many, and I asked a few. And unfortunately, I don't think it was recorded unless some student had something that he or she recorded it with. But it was so thrilling because, well, obviously she had a lifetime of preparation. There was not preparation for the event. And there is a photograph that I'll send to you at some point of us together that night. And it was one of the most exciting intellectual musical nights I've ever had, even though nobody sang or played, because the ideas came gushing forth. And she was talking about Strauss and women, and she would take apart particular songs. And I spoke about the Salzburg Festival's creation, the relation with Hofmannsthal, relationship with the Nazi Party or not, um, all of that. And nobody wanted to stop.
Yeah.
And somehow at Oxford, they allowed us to stay in that room much of the night. And, if I remember nothing else about her, though I remember a lot, I remember how alive she was that night. And she already was having medical issues, but somehow it all fell away, and she was just brilliant, but she was not in high Jessye Norman, but she was not in Georgia Jessye Norman. She was the closest I've ever experienced to just a person connecting to her thoughts.
Right.
Yeah.
But I think that while rehearsal is a wonderful thing, for her, when it overdosed, if you
Right.
will,
Yeah.
it slowed down that spontaneity. When she decided she wanted to do this album, Roots, My Life, My Song, that the
Yeah.
last album that we all
Yeah.
did, she sent me the rep list, and I'm looking at these songs going, what in the world is going, what is she trying to do here? And I'm like, where are the arrangements? Who has the arrangements? oh, we'll figure that out when we get to the first rehearsal. And I'm thinking, you're not going to figure out anything. You're going to be dreaming up there in your house in your head how you want something to go. And we're all going to have to figure it out at that moment, where there is some excitement to that, but there's also great fatigue in that too. You're trying to read someone's mind and figure out what's going on. And I'm with these jazz guys who are, they do what they do.
Right.
And those rehearsals were mind-boggling because it was, while she had her ideas, she knew that we didn't know anything. So she was completely free with it. We heard things nobody's ever going to hear. I heard things in rehearsals with her alone. You're going, where did this come from? It had no, like you said, there was nothing staged about it.
Right.
It was very funny in that she thought that there was a difference between the Jessye Norman on the stage and the Jessye Norman in life.
Mm-hmm.
She would talk about that, and I would sit there and giggle because I just thought that you really think it works like that? That we go onto the stage and we can block this?
Yeah.
We can't. That's part of what an artist is. And when she would slip up and do that, but she did things her way.
Yeah.
That's what artistry is, that she did it her way, but I got to hear it run the gamut from something that was literally on lockdown because she was so about something inside, hearing her sing out of tune all night long, to something that was so far to the other end of the spectrum. When you hear her sing When the Saints Go Marching In, and in a live concert that night, when she put up her finger like this to let me know we were going up yet another half step, we had already started in F. And we would get to A major, and she would hold an A natural at the end in full chest voice and let it rip. Well, that night she put up her finger and we're going up another step to B flat. And I thought, I need a seatbelt to be able to do this. Thinking, what is she going to do at the end? Because she can't flip it you can't all of a sudden just go into head voice. She took it right on up there. So but having so much fun and giggling. I mean, she was like a little kid on the stage. And maybe that part of her life got stifled a little bit, trying to be the best woman that she could be and defend herself against all the guys. And come on, she was 5'11". I'm sure she was 5'11" by the time she was 13 years old. Most girls they grow faster than boys. So here she was, 5'11", at 13, 14 years old. I'm sure guys of any color were not kind.
Yeah.
And so she had to deal with, okay, what do I have? What makes me? And it was her gift and her mind.
Yeah.
And
her mind was, her voice was magnificent, but her mind really was too.
Right, exactly.
That's where she and I engaged, because I'm not a singer, obviously. But we would go toe to toe, eyebrow to eyebrow on topics and go really deep. Mm-hmm. And it was thrilling. And sometimes she would sort of hold her head back and say, well, I'll grant you that.
Exactly. I'll grant you that. I can hear it so clearly.
I just want to ask one question, say one more thing about Jessye Norman, and then I want to move back to you. Did she speak Czech? I asked because one time there was a program of a lot of Czech language music. I don't recall if it was Smetana or Dvorak or who, but I remember vividly that the program note said that she translated the program from the Czech into the English for us to read the translations.
I never did any talking. The only thing that she did was the Macropolis affair at the Met, but that was she sang that,
which I was involved with. But I meant, no, this was a recital program.
Never, not once.
Famously the Macropolis affair. We had a fellow die on the opening night on the stage. Very quickly at the top of the program. The second performance was canceled due to a blizzard. That was a very hard show to do.
I was there for the last performance and then at the dinner afterwards, and I can tell you that was tiring too.
Oh boy.
All of that experience carried all the way to the very end.
Richard Versale, Versale, was on a ladder. He didn't fall off the ladder and die. He had a heart attack and fell off the ladder. And I was the person who had to take care of that. So, and then the next time was such a big blizzard that we had to cancel the show, which we didn't do often in New York, but that one we had to cancel. So it's a very troubled run. So I don't know if she spoke Czech enough to translate it, but I remember vividly that in the program it said translations by Jessye Norman. Did you ever, when she died, I wrote quite a long article of remembrance about her that was published by WQXR, which is our radio station here in New York. Did you ever read it?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I'm just going to tell listeners, go to WQXR.org, remembering Jessye Norman, and that will bring up a lot of stories that I don't want to cover today because I want to cover you. Did I leave anything out regarding Jessye Norman that you would like to say before we go to you?
I think we've covered a lot.
Okay. So, and I thank you for that. You grew up in Pensacola, Florida. And for people who don't know, that's sort of the panhandle. That is the most western and northern part of the state. It pokes into Mississippi and Louisiana.
Alabama.
And Alabama, okay.
It's 20 minutes from Alabama.
It's the so-called redneck Riviera. There are beautiful beaches. I happen to love Florida. Florida, as we say in New York. But
I had to learn that too.
yeah, Florida. But oranges, not oranges. You began, how far is it from New Orleans?
3 hours.
Okay. I know that some of your early performance was in New Orleans.
It was the New Orleans Symphony.
Symphony.
I won their young artist competition.
Yeah.
But the performance was in Mobile, Alabama.
Oh, really? Okay.
At their 3,000 seat municipal auditorium.
Mm-hmm.
So it was a whole regional thing where they'll have people, young people audition to play with the orchestra, and I was one of the 2 people who won.
I mention this because certain people, whether in not New York, but some degree New York, but maybe in Paris or Berlin, think that once you get outside of certain capitals in the Northeast, plus Chicago and San Francisco, that there's no culture in this country, whereas there is everywhere, everywhere.
People do move and go to other places.
Yeah, I mean, Jessye was from Augusta, Georgia. I mean, everywhere. Leontine from Laurel, and you name it, from everywhere. Joyce DiDonato from Kansas City, Sam Raimi from Colby, Kansas, in the middle of nowhere. This whole country. Tom Hampson from the Pacific Northwest, everywhere. But the musical life in the cities is different from place to place. I know that Pensacola is an opera company. And Florida is a state that is very large, long, complex, diverse, not easily categorized. There are alligators in the south eating people and sinkholes swallowing people up and so on. And there are huge weather systems, but it's a gorgeous state, and it's a very complex place. And the northern part of Florida has old Spanish as opposed to Spanish speakers from Latin America, but I mean old Spanish from Spain. It has French influence. It has everything. Huge African American influence, of course, Italian presence in certain places, and it's quite the mix. And so music is there. People always talk about where the first opera was done in the United States. It was either in New Orleans or in Charleston, South Carolina. Nobody will ever agree. They will agree that the second performance was in New York City and that the third was in the other southern city. And that the first one was either in French in New Orleans or English in Charleston. The second was in Italian in New York, and then the third. So therefore, opera and music and so-called classical music goes all the way back to the beginnings of our country. Part of why I was asking about New Orleans, but we can go to the larger Delta area and then North Florida and so on, is obviously, in addition to the classical arts of Europe, there is the huge presence of African American and African musical influences. Jazz, having, we kind of agree, been born in New Orleans, but maybe cultivated in Chicago and New York and other places, but born in New Orleans. And one thing I meant to ask you about the piano, about the keyboard, that I didn't. The white keys and the black keys, and I'm not talking here about race at all, but I'm talking about musical values, the so-called pentatonic scale of the black keys and their relation to music. Would you talk anything you want to tell us about the piano keys and the notes and what they express?
So you're more about the relationship, the spacing between these notes.
The
If you
spacing between the notes, but also perhaps how the pentatonic scale
when you
may
isolate,
come. Yeah,
right?
yeah,
When you separate them, if it's just all white,
yeah.
you can play something that makes complete sense mathematically, so to speak. The da 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 da. It goes in line. You can hear the cadence, you can hear the resolution, the leading tone, and then we resolve. If you're just dealing with the black notes, it's a wide open palette. It never is going to resolve. It's more of a sound.
Yeah.
It's just 5 notes that get, in me, it reminds of shaking, like maracas or something like that. Gottschalk did things. He loved F sharp major and would play
Louis
these
Moreau Gottschalk, yeah.
exactly and create these pieces based on that sound that comes from playing just on these notes. So it's more, it's less European. How's that?
Yeah. Because so much of what I love, and I'm being very generic and basic here, about the sound of music that comes from, let's say, New Orleans, east along the Gulf of Mexico, and maybe into Georgia and so forth, up to Tennessee, perhaps, is on those black keys and how it influences the music, the sound, the inflection, the way it unites with words to create an emotion that would not necessarily happen on the full notes of the white keys. I hate defining them as black and white, but people know what we mean.
Right.
And because to me, so much of the fascination, the excitement of music comes from the unexpected. Whether it's Mozart, which happens all the time, whether it's Ella Fitzgerald just riffing and doing what she does, where with Jessye Norman, you were just describing how she would sing When the Saints Go Marching In and take it higher, but there was a whole musical foundation there. Ella
Right.
Fitzgerald had her own, perhaps less defined, but completely genius musical foundation that she could go anywhere and do what she wanted. And Mozart, in his way, would do the unexpected.
Right.
When Haydn wrote a surprise symphony, you knew that you were going to be surprised and you would giggle. When Mozart did something unexpected, you would be deeply touched emotionally because you would think, God, that has to be wrong, but how could it be wrong? It's Mozart. And then you realize there's something deeper.
Right.
And I get that same experience with music often from the part of the world where you grew up. And something I absolutely love. And I've never spoken to someone at the length you and I are speaking now about that. And I wonder whether you who grew up there, you were aware of this, or whether it was just part of the musical fabric you grew up with.
I think when you grow up in something like that, you don't even realize it. It makes its very private, quiet investment
Yeah,
in as a human being. And then who knows how long down the road that comes up. Dealing with this, what you said, the black notes with this pentatonic scale of this lack of harmony to a certain extent, where things are just kind of open-ended all the time, but they will sing words on this open-ended harmony that are tragic.
mm-hmm.
And use exactly the same harmonic language underneath something that's very upbeat or something that's very tragic.
Mm-hmm.
This almost covering, wearing a mask, so to speak. I think Mozart did that a lot. You hear the music, it's got a wonderful mask on it. Like you said, when he slips up and puts something in there, it shows something very deep inside. And you have to be ready for that to drop to realize, wow, that means a lot
Yeah,
that he went there. And I mean, that's when I was growing up in the 60s and 70s, the music I was exposed to initially was Elvis Presley, Patsy Cline, that type when popular music was coming in. My parents were very, very young. So they were growing up with me and vice versa. But the popular music of the time is what I was exposed to. There was no classical music in my family. My grandfather was an artist, but he didn't make his living painting artistically, so to speak, but he had to create an advertising business of advertising and painting and lettering and all that type of stuff. So that was there only in that way, but not musically. So when Elton John came along and I was playing the piano and my grandparents went to hear Elton John do a concert, they showed up at my house the next week with a book of Elton John songs and an album and said, "We want you to do this." I can play everything that Elton John played. Didn't sound like Elton John, but I learned all the songs. I know all the words. And then, I started taking lessons like when I was 8. So my exposure, little by little, by the time I was 12, I was playing a Mozart concerto and things like that. And you just kind of take things in for what they are. You've not been told that you'll never understand this, it's beyond you, blah, blah. No one ever went there with me. They just figured, well, he's having a good time, don't bother him. Which is very Southern.
Yeah.
Someone doesn't want to know about something, they just don't ask.
Yeah.
And it can go on for 100 years that way.
No.
And that's just the way it is. And so with me, that I showed this thing for music, I was a year and a half. And I remember this little record type playing machine where you close the lid and it played. And I was memorizing what the little 45s looked like and knew them by color and knew which piece they played. And that was my life.
Yeah.
And the electric chord organ showed up with 22 keys and the little buttons with the major and the minor keys, and me trying to figure out, what is the minor key? What does that mean? And sitting there trying to solve that and match it, having no lessons. So all that was just part of me playing around. Just like you learn your numbers in school, you learn how to spell in school, and I'm over there playing with a little keyboard and sounds and living my little existence.
I didn't think Patsy Cline would come up in the conversation, but she's someone I admired a lot. Remember, I grew up in New York City where we didn't have a country music station and we didn't radio station, and we didn't exactly have a lot of Patsy Cline here. At that time, it's not the country artists came to perform in New York City when I was a kid. And also she died when I was a very little kid. But what always struck me about her, apart from the beautiful voice, was the diction, the forwardness of the words, the clarity, but also without putting a throb in her voice the way some country singers did, the way the pure declamation of the words paired with that beautiful voice that was in tune, obviously, was very special. And she was a singer who really caught my ear very early. And I always felt that if Patsy Cline had lived longer and if I had gotten to know her, I would have tried to push her toward doing a certain kind of so-called art song, whatever that is. Right. And did you have a special feeling for Patsy Cline as a singer when you were a kid?
As a child, I was always drawn to singing.
Yeah.
I was singing in a choir when I was 4 years old, and singing solos when I was 5. And when they said that I could sing alto for the first time when I was 7 years old, I thought that was the coolest thing ever. But the quality of her voice, there was something about it. And down the road later in school, listening to those recordings and thinking, this is one of the greatest instruments ever. It was very straightforward the way she sang things. She wasn't trying to sell you anything. She wasn't worried about her production of anything. Not that Sarah Vaughan was, because Miss Sarah had a voice. That voice could do anything. And she did do everything with it. And she enjoyed having fun with it. But that was also part of her black girl magic, if you will. There was voodoo in the way she sang, which was special too. And you get to hear all these different things down there at the same time. and there's a sense of expression, and that everybody can do it differently.
But Miss Sarah Vaughan was from New Jersey,
Right.
and she's Northern girl. She's one of us.
Well,
And
we'll take her, Fred. Don't worry.
okay. I only heard Sarah Vaughan once, and it was in such an unusual place that I will never forget it, even though I would not forget hearing Sarah Vaughan. I didn't hear her in a theater, in a club, or whatever in the United States or in London. It was in the ancient 100 AD arena, outdoor arena in Verona, Italy.
Wow.
And at night, under the stars, and thankfully that night it didn't rain in Verona as it often does. And normally this is where opera is done. And I have worked for many years at the festival in the summer. And this was in the middle of the season or late in the season, probably late August. And she was glorious. And there was a piano and there was a little ensemble of musicians, but not a lot. Um, she sang without a microphone. And those of us there at night in the dark holding, nobody had mobile phones then, so we were holding candles, and you saw these lights in the dark surrounding Sarah Vaughan, whose voice just carried and carried, and she did whatever she wanted. And when she experienced, and I would guess this without asking her, not only the temperature and the humidity, but the weight of the air and the way her voice carried, and she knew what she could do, she just let it rip. And she did everything that night. And it's one of the great nights of singing I've ever experienced, was that night of Sarah Vaughan in the Verona Arena. Not because of the environment, but what she did in that space,
Right.
being a genius and recognizing what she could do that perhaps she could not do in Carnegie Hall or a club in Chicago.
Well, wouldn't it be nice if the stars aligned for every occasion? Because the
Yeah.
woman had a voice unlike, I mean, nobody comes close to that instrument, but then the personality and the spirit. And when the stars aligned on a certain night and you were fortunate enough to be there,
Yep.
these are the things in life I tell people, if you have, that's why you got to go. Because if you get one of those in your life, just one, you're really, really lucky.
Yep.
If you get to be part of one of them, then that's even a greater upgrade. And then if you get to do it more than one time, look out, because you're going to fly high. For a long time, you have wonderful points of reference, and that's why someone like Nina Simone, that I never got to hear, and knowing her story and that she was a great pianist, those beautiful hands to watch her play. I tell people all the time, just watch her play. You'll learn exactly what it's supposed to look like and sound like. It's all right there. And then she had to say,
I was going to say, I'm sorry to interrupt,
no, no.
that regular listeners know that I asked many of my guests to provide selections from the Adagio catalog of things that they find inspiring, and attached to the show page for this particular program on September 13th, 2024. We have your suggestions, two of which are Nina Simone. My Baby Just Cares for Me and You'll Never Walk Alone. And I was going to say, too, that her piano playing was great. She was in North Carolina. She studied at Juilliard here in New York. And how do I frame this question? Was Nina Simone, in your view, the person more part of the performance than, say, Sarah Vaughan? But we could pick many artists where I felt that Sarah Vaughan, Ella Fitzgerald, magnificent musicians and singers and interpreters, and they could transport you. But it was not about Ella, and it was not about Sarah, about Sassy. Whereas I felt with Nina Simone, and Maria Callas, let's say, brought the biography with them, whether they liked it or not. That there was the woman, the image and the icon attached to it in a way that Ella and Sarah, I don't know about Jessye Norman, but what's
Barbara
your
Streisand.
opinion on that? Pardon me?
Barbara Streisand.
Barbara Streisand, excellent point.
So, no,
How,
no,
what's your opinion on that about Nina Simone, let's say?
well, I think Nina decided she was going to, first of all, she was going to be a pianist. And then the only way she was going to get work is if she sang. when the guy told her, okay, you can have the job, but you got to sing in the club. So she starts singing. All right. So you're doing a job that wasn't planned. It wasn't necessarily the passion of your life. And then you realize I can communicate with this. People seem to like it. And I can maybe educate people or provoke people. Because I mean, she did, it's provocative what she did. And then there are times when it is so heartbreaking what comes out. And those two recordings that I sent you, My Baby Just Cares for Me is a very easygoing song, that type of bouncy thing. And that performance, she decided she's going to do her Lisztian transcription of the piece. And her singing is, she's mumbling, literally, but while this thing is going on underneath to let everybody know, this is what I do. This is what is the depths of me. And I have all this facility and I've trained and I wanted this so badly. But then you flip it and go to the other side of You'll Never Walk Alone, which she plays solo. She doesn't even sing. And the first time I heard it, I remember I was pretty much devastated because I kept trying to figure out, what is she ever going to sing? I kept waiting for that and nobody would ever sing. But this sound was coming and all this stuff was happening and that she was doing all of this. And by the end, when it turns into the Chopin, ocean etude and Rachmaninoff is going on all over the place and the tune is still their biggest day. And she somehow found a way to communicate amidst all that. To me, there's confusion there of her as the human being.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's why that gets brought on the stage, because it was still being worked out.
Yeah.
She didn't get to just settle and say, oh, this is what I do and I'm going to have fun with it. No, I think she was much more combative. I knew people who worked with her, what they had to go through backstage to get her on the stage. When we were at Montreux, we opened the jazz festival there in 2010. Quincy Jones is in the green room in our dressing right outside and I walked out the dressing room and thought, oh God, what is happening? Oh, Quincy's going to introduce you. Oh, okay. And I said, this is becoming surreal now. The little boy from Pensacola and the lady from Augusta, Georgia are opening a jazz festival. This is a little far-fetched at this point. Yes, I do love this work, and Jessye had to say, they said, we have to sing it straight through. We don't have a break. It's just an hour set. You get to do your hour. And well, I can't just stay on the stage the entire time. I must be able to leave on occasion. And I'm going, oh God, I know what that means. Interludes. There's not going to be so we do the certain part of the group, and then we get to, she said, this is where I want to leave. And I thought, oh, okay. Well, it was before My Baby Just Cares for Me, which meant we had to have some type of a segue that took up time. And I thought, well, Nina does My Baby Just Cares for Me like Bach. And then she did the one by her when it was unaccompanied or not singing. It was more Lisztian. And I thought, okay, now what am I going to do here? So I turned it into something of like almost, it was operatic and Gluck in a very French stately type style to start out. Then it moved into Bach. And then it went into Rachmaninoff and Chopin, the way I blended those two pieces. And the next thing you know, the place is going crazy at the end of that. And the ding, da, dum, ba, bum, and Jessye comes striding out onto the stage. And when you feel this energy and realize you're on the same stage where Nina Simone was, and these people who've been coming there for decades, and here's this woman who's known for opera in front of a crowd, they really don't, a lot of them didn't know who she was. They said, oh, it's another Black woman. She's American, I guess. And we're doing this stuff. You just have to count your blessings that you got to be part of something like that. So that music for me is.
Yeah. But among the pianists that you list, no pun intended, actually, because he's playing Brahms, is Radu Lupu. And you are among the many pianists I know who, when they're asked to name a pianist they revere, they name Radu Lupu. Talk about why.
Everything is in the sound. Everything. Every last things you can't even begin to imagine are in the sound. and you hear stuff, you listen to him and thinking, well, I know this piece. I've known this piece for 25 years. And you start hearing things and you realize, oh my gosh, that's in the score. And he hears that. And he's put that out there for us. And it's, I mean, I've heard him the first time in Paris a long, long time ago, probably 35 years ago. And it was a great, great night.
Yeah.
Phenomenal recital. And then I heard him another time in New York, and it was pretty much a bust. I thought, well, you know what? You want to do this job? And people would tell me, oh, I heard so-and-so, they're falling apart. And I said, have you heard them 50 times in a season? I said, we need a batting average. If your team loses the first 2 games, that doesn't mean the season is over. They've just lost 2 games. They just might come back and win 178 more. Okay. Can we wait until we have push the panic button? It takes a few months in order to push that button. But what he's able to share, to offer to us. I mean, that's what we do with music. We offer, we share. And that he gets it so together and so clear within him, but then has this amazing capacity to say, you know what? I'm going to trust it and just jump. He's not planning things in front of you. He's no longer organizing things in the intellectual way. He's trusted that those discs are there, they're filled, they're taken care of. And if we need to tap into it, it'll tap into it and move on. But there's
if
something.
you agree with me, or if you disagree with me, it's also quite fine. Why do certain pianists, musicians, but let's say pianists for now, who become known for their eccentricities, Glenn Gould, become more exalted for those eccentricities than for the things that Radulupu brought that were profundities or just a depth of experience and connection that others use as eccentricities, for lack of a better word. And yet we remember them.
How about business, publicity, money? I mean, it still goes on.
Why do audience members buy into it?
What was that?
Why do audience members buy with it? I can't listen to Glenn Gould often because he's murmuring and muttering the whole time.
Right, but when people
recordings, and I don't want to hear that.
Right, but when people are told, I'm not going to go political here, but when people are told something over and over and over and over again, whether it's true or not, about 50%, maybe 45% of the people will believe that. They won't question its authenticity. They won't question whether it's the truth or anything. They won't question the source. They just believe it because they've heard it so many times. And if someone says the greatest pianist living,
how do you know?
Oh, well, we're going. But, you know, have you heard it's the greatest pianist living? We have tickets. And I've heard people tell me that. Oh, do you have tickets to this? Oh, but they're going. And I'm thinking, no, I can't do that. I never was able to do that. That's not how I was raised. It's not how I was trained. It's not how I feel about music. That I'm not, it's not a circus act. I realize that does exist. I do understand that people run to things like that. Whether they run back, whether that helps to sustain music, that's another question that people need to ask, because once it wears out, it's gone. And what are you going to do? Just look for the next cute little thing that comes along? And I know that's part of the equation too. And I talk with students about that and just warn them. I said, look out. You need to know when you go out there, what is your reason to be standing there or sitting there, and hold tight. Because the storm is going to be real. The ride is not going to be peaceful. It's going to have, the waves are going to be big. And you have to figure out, how am I going to stay anchored through this, doing what I do? And it's, you know, Radulupu sat there, sometimes in a straight back chair, I think most of the time in a straight back chair, and just sat there with his arms out and played. He did not have the world's largest hands. I think that got him in trouble at some points when he chose repertoire that was just a little bit much for that type of extension. But the things that he did, the things he was able to say with those Brahms pieces, it's astounding still. And I go back and sometimes I just sit late at night and turn that on and get down on the floor and have the speakers right by me and feel like that I'm sitting there in the room with him. And the things that he imagines for us and guides me, if you allow yourself to be guided by that, I'd love to be guided by sound.
Yeah.
think that's what music is for, that it takes us to a better place and to the best place of who we are, because that's why it was written down and it's still here hundreds of years later, because it is a source of that type of energy,
Yeah.
spiritual energy, if you will.
You
So
also included Lorraine Hunt Lieberson, about whom I was speaking recently with another artist, who was her friend. And she was a very special artist whose biography has been altered, affected by the fact that she famously died. She suffered with cancer for a long time and died at the age of 52. So a lot of the way people look at her singing career was through, quote, suffering. Whereas in my view, she understood that, but I think she also took the opportunity to not reflect her suffering, so to speak, but to make every moment very important and real and felt, and that she chose her music with care, and she didn't necessarily do the roles that people say, oh, you would be a great whatever. But she was a great musician who was also a great person.
mhm.
And you have her singing Handel, and talk about why.
I shared Thanksgiving with Lorraine about 40 years ago, and she was having what she called a vocal crisis. And it all pretty much was because she was doing things that other people thought she should. And this is what happens when we're young, and especially with singers, that people do what other people tell them they think they should be doing. Oh, you'd be great in this. Oh, you do this high pianissimo stuff really well. Oh, that'll be great. Oh, you'll do that. And then all that does is get in people's heads and freaks them out later on.
Yep.
They can't do it. So we talked. We both were quite young, and we talked about it. And, that was it. And that was the only time I really ever got to spend time with her. And she was a little quiet after that. She had some quiet years where, I guess,
Yeah.
trying to figure out what was she going to sing, because she had something within her that was beyond. And that's what was
Yes.
so extraordinary about her. It was beyond this aria that I chose, as with Rosie Steps from Theodora, the studio recording, where you would think, oh, studio recordings can be sterile. You can watch a live performance from Glyndebourne, that's out there too. But this, just to sit and listen.
Yep.
It's perfect. Every last word, every last sound of every consonant, of every vowel, of every color, every little phrase, the meaning, that she cared about every second that she was with that music.
Yep.
Isn't that what the point of an artist is, when you're on the stage, that you're sharing how much you care about something, not smothering it, not adorning it so that it makes you look better, but to share that depth of connection, hoping that that might inspire someone else who might not be having the best day of their life, to feel that that is possible and that it
Yep.
lifts them up. And this is where, with her, when I heard that the first, I mean, it literally stopped me in my tracks. And I just sat there and thought, tears running down your face, and you're like, how is this even possible? And knowing her story and how complicated things were, and that she was still able to deliver that from some place that's divine. Literally, it is from a divine place.
I struggle all these years on with trying to separate an artist from their story, the facts of their life, because I want to receive what they have to offer me on the stage as that. And if I know a lot of the biography, I find that that interferes with my direct reception of the music making that's happening. And, as you and we know many of these people that we work with. And, Jessye Norman, as you said, was an enigma, to put it mildly, with all kinds of contradictions and so on, but fascination. And I would try to put that aside when I heard her, and I did, frankly. And I particularly, I didn't say this to you ever, but I particularly thought that my favorite language for her in singing was French. And the roles that she sang in French were my absolute favorite. Les Troyens, but not only the Gluck, even her recorded Carmen and Carmen. And but there are singers with whom I'm very close as friends. And when I sit in the auditorium and hear them perform, I'm loving it as their friend, but I'm also trying to, for the moment, not be their friend.
Mhm.
And then there are singers I know casually who I revere, and I've not made an effort to become friends with them because I still want to continue to receive their artistry as it is. Susan Graham, um, who I just think is super duper, but we don't really know each other. We've spoken once, but I just think she's terrific. And so, what is it like for you? Because these are collaborators, they sometimes become friends,
Mhm.
and you are an artist too. You're not audience. You can be in the audience, but you are an artist too. I work with artists and I sometimes can bring things out of them that benefits them, but I'm not the performer.
Mhm.
And how do you, if you choose to separate the personal from the professional, how does that happen?
I will say this a lot. My students, if they watch this, they're all going to be laughing. But I ask them, probably it happens at least half a dozen times a week. They have trouble with something in a score, and I don't see your name in here anywhere.
Mm.
Your name's not in my score. Neither does it say, I don't see it in my score. Panic here. I said, the fact that your name is on the check and on the program, that really is all that needs to be there.
Yeah.
Rest of it, how fortunate that we are that we're just a conduit, that this amazing thing called music gets to pass through us into a space where other people have actually paid money and are giving of their time to share that space with us. So yes, we all get excited because we know the person who's playing. I go for I want to go because of what I know the experience can be. While it might be exciting and people are screaming, Jessye, 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 and the walls are shaking, what every time it was hysterical. She'd sing a program and then all of a sudden the encores would hit and we'd have another hour ahead of us, like in Salzburg. And that's when the program would start.
Yeah.
Then you would hear the person cutting loose, completely letting it rip with no whatever. And these are the pieces that she's done more than anything, but she just throws it off like it's no big deal. Those are the moments that you had to wait for some people. You had to, when people were talking about how Jessye had to warm up and through a roll or through a recital because it's like a big steamship coming through. It doesn't get to full steam until after it's out of the harbor and all these types of, analogies. And when artists can go on stage and sacrifice completely their ego, their person, and it's not your personality, it's your ego that runs something that's not good. It holds on for fear or whatever reason. And to be able to let that drop, there's a magical moment there. If I go for a person, it's like going to hear students for the first time. You get your first university job, and there's the student recital that happens on Thursdays at 11 a.m. And you're sitting there, nervous as can be, and your heart's beating, and you feel like I'm going to play the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto. No, you're not playing a note. You're going to watch your students get up there and play a note, and it's terrifying.
Yep.
That's a very, very different thing. And you're hoping you can get them to the place one day where you're going to be able to trust that they trust that just being present in that moment and that they have practiced enough to where they can be present and allow it to pass through them. And isn't that what, that to me is what it's all about. We practice so much not to show anybody that we can do anything. That's not the point. I mean, if you're standing in front of a piano, I'm assuming that you already are a singer. Please stop proving that. Please stop handing that business card to everyone. I'm a singer. I'm a singer. Don't tell everyone you're a pianist. Please don't show me that you know how to play the piano. I don't care. I really don't. It's one of the most boring things in the world that you sing or you play. That's not important. It's what are you going to say, and to fight with everything you have to get to that place so that you actually can share it versus saying, look at me, I'm going to sing again, or I'm going to play again. No. And that's where business comes in, and salespeople, and some people who look better because they have one arm up in the air above their head when they finish a piece playing the piano, or both arms are outspread, or they wear certain clothes or shoes, or they who knows what. There's so much that goes on that has nothing to do with music. And that would terrify me to get caught into that type of you're in a trap. Because to certain people, you are producing a lot of money for them. And let's don't forget that part. This is a whole pyramid type thing that if the top person makes it, that money has got to trickle down to where it covers all these managers and artists and lawyers and this and publicists and on and on and on. That you lose the music. Someone like Radu Lupu, that he didn't go there. That was amazing. Alicia De La Rocha. She did not go there.
No, she didn't know.
The woman was very, very famous and well known throughout the world. But when she walked on stage, you realized, ooh, she is going to sit here and very quietly show you how to prepare a very special dish in Spain.
And talk about tiny hands. She was a tiny person.
Hands, but she knew exactly where they needed to go. And that was her responsibility to handle that. Not for anything for you to worry about, but for something that she had to work on, and that she did, and she understood, and she made sure that she had the strength, physically, mentally, spiritually, to handle all of that repertoire with the guys hanging out with their hands, 3 times the size. My teacher, Anne Shine, it's the same thing. This woman can walk onto the stage completely silent, smile, and sit down and play, and you're astounded by the communion that she has with the music. And that is what we all remember from those experiences. I mean, I don't know if it's in your library, but she recorded the Schumann album probably about 20 years ago. And the end of the Humoresque was amazing, but the end of it, the last couple of movements, is something that literally saved my life. What is there, because Schumann he's the composer of what is not said, and then things that are said and thrown off as dust almost. But the things that are not said, the unspoken in piano music. And I talk about it that way because that's all you can hear the conversation behind the scenes with something that has no text to it. And that people are willing to go there. That is very hard for the public. That's why certain pieces are never played in public.
Yeah.
You don't hear a lot of people play the late pieces of Brahms. They don't play them because they disappear in a big space. And if one person coughs, the magic's gone. It breaks. But I mean, that's just,
I've been fortunate, as I know you have, to work with many great conductors. And I was named 3 who most influenced me. I won't say they were the greatest, but the 3 who influenced me the most were Leonard Bernstein, Claudio Abbado, and James Levine, just in terms of exposure and what they taught me. Bernstein first, and Abbado for a long time when I lived in Italy, and then Levine when I worked at the Met. But many, many others. But if I had to just pick one, and I don't want to do that, it would be Abbado. And when he had a long illness and he died, and at the very end, he was studying Schumann, the Third Symphony, and was buried with the score of Schumann, the Third Symphony. And I always found that interesting. You would have expected Verdi or Rossini, I don't know whom, but it was Schumann he wanted. And it's, it's like when we talk about the last performance a singer gave or a musician gives, and or the last piece that they composed, Mozart allegedly the Requiem, Messe da Requiem, Verdi Falstaff, and Wagner Parsifal, and how these are supposed to be statements. They're not necessarily, but something that a musician would bring close to him at the very end when he knows the end is coming, to me is very interesting. With Bernstein, it was the Mahler Fifth, from what I gather. And I don't know what Levine had near him at the end. I know that he was looking at Mozart and Berlioz, and I know that he had a special feeling for Schubert and might have had that close. But talk. I didn't know we'd be doing this, but talk more about Schumann because he's someone I don't explore enough on this program.
Well, it's like I said, his ability, I think, plus, I mean, his situation, who he was as a human being, there obviously was some type of mental instability emotionally. It's hard to know really the truth of what was going on back in the 1830s, because even to this day, 100 years later, people still try to cover up certain things about composers like Ravel, and their friends would say, "Oh no, well, it was impossible. He couldn't have been like that." And they protect.
Yeah.
But with Schumann, he's that what's the inside and the outside, and that in music he chose to the juxtaposition of things, which I think sometimes is so startling to people that it unnerves them. I mean, there's this musicians, artists, we talk about this a lot, that you're sitting in a hall or you're sitting on the stage, and one of those moments arrives where you know something has touched this thing where you're not even doing anything anymore, it's just happening, and that's when somebody coughs. Because it makes them physically uncomfortable. They get nervous when that divine moment arrives. And for some people, it is the vulnerability of it, because that is pure vulnerability at that point, that someone's willing to surrender. And it makes some people uncomfortable. And you all of a sudden have this one cough at the end of something that was extraordinary. And we all cough for different reasons. But that's one of them. And Schumann, it's just the intimacy of it. But also, I talk about this a lot too with people, that yes, we have to play for a hall, but you must realize that a lot of this music we do was not created to be played in big spaces.
Mm-hmm.
It was heard in smaller spaces, not 3,000 seats. And you have to make your choices as to what you're going to do. A pianist and something like that, you're going to play an evening of the Debussy Preludes. I hope it's not January, because you're going to have a lot of competition out there.
Yeah.
Jessye would go to Paris, and sometimes I thought she did it intentionally, and she would do an entire French program. The French hate their music, especially the Parisians. They don't want to hear Poulenc.
Or Berlioz.
Berlioz, Ravel, they want Schubert, Mozart, Wagner, all these types of things. They don't want that. And that you challenge a public with intimacy. The bigger the numbers, the higher the possibility is that something is going to break that magical bubble. And a lot of things aren't played. Schumann he takes it so far. Sometimes when he writes, there's it's the end of the Kinderszenen, where he, instead of writing in the regular size font for the notes, they're all written as tiny little notes. But it's a full thing with both hands. And you're looking at that thinking, now, what happened here? In this day and age, you would think something happened with the computer, that it shrunk it. But that's what he wanted, because it's meant to be played from a different place.
Mm-hmm.
It's not real. It's not necessarily present, but it must evoke something that challenges you. And those are places that are really tricky to go to. And if you got 1,000 people sitting in a room with you, it's not always the easiest place to go.
Yeah.
That is Mr. Schumann. The songs, the same thing. This Im wunderschönen Monat Mai, one of the hardest songs in the world to sing, and he starts the whole bloody cycle with it. And to deal with all the intimacy of it, because without it, it's not going to work.
Right.
It's just, and people think, oh, well, it's fine, but it's just not very interesting. And I think, well, because you can't scale it down into that zone where it works.
I'm going to make a public service announcement. A number of years ago, when it was still called Avery Fisher Hall, I'm a subscriber of long standing to the New York Philharmonic, and my seats are the 2 aisle seats on the far left, so I can see the piano keyboard, and I like the sound in the older version of the hall. Now I sit around, but at that time, this was a good seat. And I went, and my guest at the last minute could not come, and so I had an empty seat next to me. and a person at the last minute decided that she was going to sit in that empty seat without asking. And I won't name the country, but she was from a country where a lot of people put on too much fragrance, a
Ooh,
lot. And I have asthma, and I was coughing and wheezing and struggling, and my eyes were burning and so on. And I said to her, "Get out of the seat." No, I'm allowed. You're not. I have the ticket. You're not allowed, but it's empty. Get out of the seat, because people around me who all knew me as a subscriber knew that I was not a cougher. But normally, I mean, if I were, I would get out. I was right by the exit door. But this woman who stank of bad perfume would not get up. And at the intermission, the interval, everybody around me made her get out, because they said to her, "You are causing him distress." And he's a model audience member who would get out if he had the problem, but you're ruining his performance, and you're taking a seat that he didn't invite you and you didn't pay him for the ticket. And they had to get the house manager, not for me, but
right.
because all these people around were disturbed, number
Mhm.
one, by the smell, but number two, by my coughing.
Mm.
And I felt terrible for the it was mostly a Mozart performance. So it was a smaller orchestra, and it
Mm.
was awful. So people, you do not have to wear fragrance if you're going to a performance. Ever.
Public
Ever, ever,
service
ever.
announcement, be ready, people. No, but you learn that with singers,
Yeah. Oh,
you know,
also.
page turners, which I have, they don't exist anymore in my existence, but it was in Jesse's rider. No perfume, and you wear
Good.
all black. Yeah, and you wear all black.
Yep.
We had a girl show up one night wearing, I don't even remember what color it was, no sleeves. So all we saw were white arms for days, hair, short dress, the whole bit. And they told her she had to go home. And she had on all this perfume. And I said, I can't sit next to you. I'm sorry.
Yep.
Can't do it. But
Mark Markham, I could talk to you for days.
thank
This has been a pleasure. Did
you.
I leave anything out that you would want to include
Oh my goodness.
on any topic, musical, political, gastronomical,
Oh, food, my goodness, that's
metaphysical?
dangerous. Food is dangerous in a wonderful way.
Well,
Why?
I'm gonna say something about food that you could react to. Because I write cookbooks and so on,
I
especially about
know.
Italy. People ask me often, where is the best carbonara in Rome? Where's the best cotoletta alla milanese in Milan? Where's the best pesto in Genoa? I don't know. I haven't tasted every single version. It's like, who's the best pianist or the best mezzo soprano? I don't know. It depends what they're doing. And I don't want to name the best. And it's
But
that problem that you were talking about before, that someone becomes hot for a reason and people have to buy tickets or they have to get into this restaurant to taste their carbonara. No, sample around, get to know it, understand what makes a good pesto in your view, and then maybe go back to that restaurant where you like the pesto the most. Doesn't mean it's the best.
that's what ruins restaurants, though.
Yeah,
And
it's
they get
true.
known for the one thing, and everybody around the world, especially now because it gets on Instagram and everybody plans their trip, and that's where they try to go.
Yeah.
You're an
I'll,
influencer.
I'll have the branzino. There are not enough fish in the sea to feed all the branzino if it becomes famous in a restaurant.
Exactly. No, no. Food is another, that's the whole thing. Cooking, and for me, it's like music. It's the same thing. And I
It's not
take
supposed to be
time to do
competitive.
it. What was that?
It's not supposed to be competitive.
No, there's no such thing as the best of something.
No.
Point is to enjoy the things of great quality that you work on to deliver something that's beautiful and that people realize they're sharing it because they care about it.
Yeah.
You know, we
Yeah.
say in the South, oh, when something food is good, it's that you must have put your big toe in it. That means that it's spectacular.
Yeah.
And you can tell it's made with love and care, and that someone cared about it while they were doing it. They just didn't throw something together from this box, this can, and this jar and stir it together and say, here it is. No, no, that doesn't show me anything.
But it's also in the hands and the nose and the eyes, whether it's playing the piano or making food. I the other day, for people I care about, made an egg salad. And it was an unusually good egg salad because I started with good eggs. I cooked the eggs properly. I chilled it properly. I used a good brand of mayonnaise. I didn't make my own. Everything was in proportion. Everything was the right temperature. There was not too much mayonnaise. The eggs were cut just so that they had texture and they didn't vanish into the mayonnaise. And the people I served it to said they'd never tasted egg salad like that. And it's just about the care, but also aesthetic judgment. And I'm just talking eggs and mayonnaise. I didn't use salt or pepper. I used a little bit of dill. And
Right,
that's it.
right, but that's the thing. If you have quality ingredients chosen with care and you're thoughtful about it,
Yeah.
and you put it together, I mean, that is what great French cooking is, that they take
Right.
the finest of the finest and put it together ever so beautifully. And there you go. And you taste everything.
Yeah.
This is the point. And this is, I mean, I was always that way, but then living there for 12 years, that was enough to reinforce it completely. And then dealing with wine on top of it. You know, my friends know, you come over here to eat, I'm going to cook.
Yeah.
I'm going to spend my day if I need to, or half the day, or thinking about it for a week before, trying to figure out now what I wonder what's going to be at the market. I wonder what they're going to have, because you
Yeah.
can't plan anything. Why plan it? That takes away the fun.
In France or perhaps in Italy, have you ever eaten squab?
Of course.
So, squab for people listening in other countries is pigeon. It's pigeon with a fancier name. And do you like
But
squab?
in French, it's pigeon.
Pigeon. I know. Do you like it?
Yes.
So I'm concluding this wonderful conversation with gratitude, my friend, with a quote from our friend Miss Norman.
Oh,
Pigeonholes are just for pigeons.
amen.
Which is wisdom in the extreme. It's she can you say it the way she said it? I cannot quite get the sound around that of pigeonholes are just for pigeons.
Pigeonholes are just for pigeons.
Mark Markham, thank you very much. It's been a
Thank you
delight.
so much, Fred. What a pleasure.